had taken about $100 million out of Mainland savings and left Mainland with promissory notes on apartment complexes. And these were run-down apartment complexes that at the time were probably worth less than $20 million. There were like 33 of them. So here you had $100 million taken out versus $20 million that they were worth. And now they're probably worth less than $5 million, and most of them have probably been sold. I mean, the taxpayers took a huge, probably at least $60 million hit on that. So Greg and I began looking at Pulver and his people, and who are these people, and how did they get down to Mainland? And we went up to Long Island and started knocking on doors and looking into it. And we found out that Pulver lived right across the street from a guy named Martin Schwimmer. And Schwimmer was Mario Renda's partner.
That famous name, Mario Renda.
Yes. Now, Renda and Schwimmer had brokered almost $100 million of deposits into Mainland. In other words, they were taking deposits from people, credit unions, things like that.
Unions.
Yeah. Right. Even
pension funds.
Yeah, pension funds from all over the country, and then placing them in various S&Ls where they get the highest rates. And of course, Renda was doing deals with the S&Ls behind the scenes. You pay me 10%, I'll put this so much deposits. And they were all in what they call linked financing. Renda would put the money in and say, I'm going to put this much money into your S&L, and you're going to lend this to my buddy over here, okay? So here we had Renda and Schwimmer brokering $100 million into Mainland savings, a medium-sized S&L in Houston. And here we have Pulver and his people taking out $100 million. And it turns out Pulver and Schwimmer are neighbors in Kings Point, Long Island, which is a very exclusive bedroom community in New York City. And when Greg and I found that out, we knew we had a big story.
Because they had crime connections.
Yeah, Schwimmer, in fact, was even indicted for laundering money and buying bearer bonds for mafia.
So this was organized crime just coming in from New York, coming into Texas, because they saw a good target to raid.
Yeah, and they weren't exactly met at the Harris County line by the sheriff either. These people, they couldn't come into Houston unless they had permission from the organized crime people that controlled Houston, and which is the Marcello family out of New Orleans at that time.
What was your first indication that the CIA was involved?
Well, there was a U.S. prosecutor in Kansas City named Lloyd Monroe who was following Farhad Azima, who was an Iranian that was a contract agent for the CIA, had an airline company called Global International Airways.
Oh, that's a proprietary airline of the CIA,
yes.
isn't it? I've seen that.
Yeah, Azima, quote, owned that. And Azima was involved in a bank there in Kansas City, and he was a director of it, and it failed. The president was killed in a mysterious one-car accident. The president's right-hand man was Anthony Russo, a disbarred attorney who had been disbarred for racketeering. He was a mafia fellow. And Russo also worked for Azima. So Azima had mafia and CIA connections. And Lloyd Monroe, who was a prosecutor with the Organized Crime Strike Force in Kansas City, was following Azima. And when I was following Renda, and I found Renda at Azima's bank, okay, their little bank. In fact, that was the first place Renda was caught with his linked financing scam, was in this little bank in Kansas City that Azima was involved with, okay. So I eventually got into contact with Lloyd Monroe, and I would writing these stories about the mafia and BB and Renda, and I would send them up to Lloyd, and he kept saying, you're missing something really big. There's one big area you're missing, but he wouldn't tell me what it was.
Sounds kind of like Deep Vault. He'd give you a little bit, but won't tell you the whole thing. Right?
Yeah, and he was really being, a good prosecutor by not giving me information. I mean, when he left the Organized Crime Strike Force, he confirmed what I'm about to tell you.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Okay.
He couldn't tell you then legally?
No.
Oh, he could.
I don't know.
I see.
I don't think he felt right about telling me.
I see.
I think if I'd found out and asked him, he would have confirmed it.
But he put you on track.
Well, he didn't put me on trial. I didn't know what he was talking about. I was frustrated. And then one day, after we'd been in the story for a year and a half, 2 years, Greg got a call from a woman in Houston.
Is he Greg who now?
Greg C. He was the business reporter.
Oh, okay.
Who
at the
he's
Post.
doing the work
Yeah,
with.
okay.
Who started chewing him out for not digging deeper on this story and that story. And Greg and I went to see her, and she said she had worked for a man named Robert Corson, who had a savings and loan, and that Corson was an asset of the CIA, at which I responded, I remember that time, what's a CIA asset? I didn't know anything about the CIA. But when she said that, you know, kind of the light went off.
That was the big thing.
I said, I wonder if that's what Lloyd Monroe was talking about. So I went up to see, went up to Kansas City to see Lloyd, and he confirmed it, that Azima had the CIA connections. In fact, the CIA had sabotaged a prosecution, an investigation prosecution of Azima, had stopped it basically. Had gone to the FBI. The FBI was investigating Azima, told him not to, that he's one of ours, leave him alone.
Is this where the term "get out of jail free" card
That's
was
where
in
it
a
came from,
relationship?
yes.
Was he
Well,
the
the
person?
FBI, one of the FBI agents that investigated that told me that, you know, that they were told that Azima had it. Well, they weren't told. The way they do that, the CIA, when they want to stop a prosecution or something, they don't go to the Justice Department. They don't go to the U.S. Attorney. They go to the FBI. The FBI and the CIA have a very close relationship. And there are actually examples. In fact, there was one in Miami, an investigation in the 70s of Guillermo Hernandez Cartaya, where the CIA went to the FBI and got them to stop the investigation. But the FBI had never told the U.S. Attorney's Office. They just shut it down. And the assistant U.S. Attorney was doing this, was very frustrated and angry and mad. In fact, he filed FOI requests with the FBI to find out what the CIA was telling them. Of course, he was denied it, but they had to tell him the number of documents he was denied. So there were like 20 of them regarding Cartaya. So the FBI could shut an investigation down and not even tell the U.S. Attorney's Office, okay, because of this relationship. And that's what happened with Azima. The CIA, somebody in the CIA went to somebody in the FBI, said, leave this guy alone. And so it filtered down to the ranks till it hit the bottom, the two FBI agents that were investigating Azima. And they just got the word basically, and as one of the FBI agents told me, well, we found out that Azima had a get-out-of-jail-free card.
There are a couple of interesting consequences of all that. One is Azima's airline, Global Airways, was the airline used to fly some of the tow missiles to Iran during the Iran-Contra affair.
Yeah, one of his sister companies called Race Aviation, which was owned by Azima's brother. And I remember questioning Azima. I was trying to find out, do you own Race? No, I don't own it. Leave me alone. I've told everybody I don't own it. Well, after about 20 minutes of questioning, I finally got him to admit that his brother owned it.
So it's all in the family.
Yeah.
The other thing, in terms of the stonewalling that the federal officials did in terms of blocking prosecutions, that has an interesting effect in terms of the human fallout. Trying to put a human face on this story is often hard, but there's a very poignant case, I think, in the Kansas City incident. One of the people who they were able to prosecute when they failed to be able to go after the higher-ups at the bank was a gentleman by the name of Fred Figge. Mr. Figge was a borrower at Indian Springs and was prosecuted, I believe it was on 33 counts. He had done nothing more than borrow. They decided that it was insufficient paperwork. The bank had never demanded more exact paperwork from him or the people who he was involved with for their projects. They were borrowing money to develop in Hawaii at the time. Mr. Figge ended up going to jail. I believe he spent 2.5 years in jail, and for 2 of those years he went untreated for cancer. His conviction was overturned on appeal. Unfortunately, he didn't get to live long enough to see the final vindication. He died recently as a result of the cancer that went untreated while he was in prison.
Oh, boy. Boys play rough up at that level. Well, Pete, you started writing this incredible series in the Houston Post But the big boys up in the Washington Post and the New York Times and networks, they didn't pay any attention to it, did they?
No, they didn't. The AP picked up some of the stories and ran them, although there were even problems with that. Sometimes the Dallas office of the AP would pick it up and it would get run in Texas papers, but for some reason the AP people in New York City or Washington would not pick it up and run it on the national wire. So many of the stories ran in Texas but never ran in the national wire.
Did you ever talk to them? What was their attitude, do you think?
I talked to the AP in Dallas, they were real gung-ho. I know that our editor, Dave Bergen, talked to AP in Washington a lot and really railed at them, and they kept promising them they were going to do it the next time, and they never did.
I saw an article in the Daily Texan which was investigating this. Why in the world wouldn't this be all over the pages of the New York Times, all the news that fit to print, right? And the Washington Post in the nation's capital and all the networks. And the people at the big newspapers said, oh, Houston Post, that's a nothing newspaper, doesn't have any credibility, and who's Pete Bruton anyway?
Well, Pete, what is your theory of why, say, the Washington Post and the New York Times and CBS and Time Magazine didn't go into the connection that you were making between organized crime, S&L failures, CIA, et cetera? Because the S&L crisis was a big story by this time. It was being written about nationally, but they missed this element that you were investigating.
Well, I think you have to back up. Yeah, there were a lot of stories written about the S&Ls, but they weren't very good. And they didn't go into any detail. It was just these broad overviews that they got from their sources in Congress. Very few of the big papers went in and actually looked at particular savings and loans that have failed and really dug down and found out why they failed and where the money went. The Philadelphia Inquirer did a big story on Hill Financial Savings I mentioned previously. I don't think the Washington Post or the New York Times ever did, or the Wall Street Journal for that matter, ever did any original groundbreaking investigative reporting on the S&L crisis.
Why was that the case, do you think?
It's too hard. I mean, you can't do it sitting in your office in Washington, New York City.
You have to go into the courthouses and dig through the records and actually figure out what was going on, and that's just not the way they operate. They wanted the documents handed to them by official sources in suits.
So they've gotten lazy?
Yeah, I think, yeah, it's lazy and it's arrogance, you know.
Well, couldn't there also be another...
If it wasn't our story, then we're not going to do it. You know. We've got to break it.
Oh, I see. How much of it do you think is the fact that the Washington Post has had a long relationship with the CIA, a cozy relationship with the CIA, and the New York Times is the prime newspaper of the American power structure and the ruling elite, and they're not going to do anything that digs too deeply and might destabilize in the American people's mind just the system itself.
Yeah, I think you're right, and we could go on about the Washington Post's relationship to the CIA. It is a long, it's very strong. Katharine Graham I mean, she made a speech to the CIA, I think, last year, you know, and talked about there are certain things that have to be kept secret now, you know, which is a very strange attitude for a journalist. But you've got to understand the CIA, it controls a lot of information, and it can reward and punish a lot of reporters in Washington and New York City. You know, if they want to help somebody with a story, they can do it. If they want to hurt you, they can do it. Okay? Not only that, it controls a lot of information about Congress. I mean, the CIA is so anti-democratic, it's so inimical to the idea of free people and democracy because they are very secretive. And they keep everything secret, and they operate covertly. And so, you know, they've got a lot of information about a lot of things that they can use, I won't say as blackmail, but certainly as pressure on reporters and congressmen and probably anybody else they wanted to. So you just hardly ever see original investigative reporting on the Central Intelligence Agency.
Well, what about the government now? You would think that the government would be interested in investigating this, but they whitewashed it too. Tell us about that.
Well, the day after the first story of the Post came out, Frank Annunzio, a congressman from Chicago, I believe, came out, and he's on the House Banking Committee, and he was going to do a big investigation of this. And of course, Annunzio had his hand in the S&L cookie jar, you know, and he had big problems. I think he was trying to divert attention away from him to something else.
Was he one of the Keating Five?
No,
he wasn't. Okay.
But his top aide went playing golf with Keating all the time,
Oh, okay.
and you know, so there was a relationship there.
Keating 5½.
Yeah. So Annunzio immediately jumped on this. I think he was told, though, so in a way that you stay away from this. In fact, in his letter, eventually to the Intelligence Committee, the House Intelligence Committee, he passed the buck to them. You know, you investigate it. The CIA director, William Webster, refused to appear before Annunzio's committee, saying, I'm not going to appear for you. This is a matter for the House Intelligence Committee. And so Annunzio's people investigated some of my claims, and they confirmed the part about Azima and the get-out-of-jail-free card. Okay, so that was enough. Annunzio says, we've confirmed some of this. He kicked it over to the Intelligence Committee. In his letter, it was all about the CIA. There wasn't one word about the mafia in Annunzio's letter, which I thought was very curious.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, now the Senate or the House Intelligence Committee is controlled by the CIA anyway. The staff particularly.
I think they're in their hip pocket. Yeah, I mean, you know, you just don't want to buck the CIA.